Welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I'm Michael Laran, a science fiction and fantasy author on a journey to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I pull back the curtain on my writing life and how I'm building a writing career while working a full-time job, raising a family, and attending law school classes in the evenings. You can find show notes for this week's episode, a free starter library of my fiction, and much more at michaellaran.com. Hello, and welcome to episode 115. 115 is a good number, and this week we're going to talk about a hodgepodge of topics here. But first things first, kind of the most obvious thing in the room, I had teased that I was going to have a new microphone, and I did get a new microphone, and it is a upgrade from what I have currently, but I'm not using it yet because I am in the process of getting started with recording my own audiobooks. So I'll talk more about that as the weeks go on, but I did get it, and expect to hear some new stuff here in maybe a few weeks. But one of the cool things that I'm doing is I found a way to build a vocal booth in my basement to narrate my audiobooks. So I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're like whisper rooms. Like, it's not going to be anything that fancy, but I do have this really awkward closet in my basement, in my studio. It's almost like a Harry Potter room. It's like 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And until now, I've just put a bunch of shoes in there, and there's really not much in there. So I thought, this would be a really great opportunity to turn this into a vocal booth. So I'm in the process of doing that. I have ordered, I'm doing kind of a weird way of doing it. I don't know if this will work, but I'm hoping it will. So I've got like some poster board, and I'm going to put acoustic foam on the poster board, and then I'm going to put the poster board on the wall. So that way you don't destroy the wall. It's a cinder block wall, so I kind of have the same problem that I used to have with my studio, which is how do you hang things on it? But I think these command strips will hold it because this stuff doesn't weigh very much at all. So I'll share more about that as we go, and as I build it, I do plan on recording, some stuff on my YouTube channel, try to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to try to track my progress as I build this tiny little awkward little booth. So more to come on that, but I will be narrating audiobooks. The reason I'm doing this is because I am going to be narrating my new upcoming book, which is going to be coming out in July, and that is called Your Self-Publishing Questions Answered. 150 questions on book marketing, publishing, and writing to help you stay motivated. I think it's a great time to do it over the summer, and I'm going to have more on that very soon, but I'm publishing that book with the Alliance of Independent Authors. I know that I've talked about that a lot on this show. So another announcement. For those of you who a couple weeks ago took my author royalty survey, if you were one of the few people that signed up to test my author sales database, well, you're going to be getting an email from me in about the next week and a half. So I know many of you listen to the show, so that's probably exciting to hear. So just be on the lookout for me in the next week and a half. I'm going to have some things for you to test. The only wrinkle in all of this is that either you have to have a Windows machine or you have to be able to install a virtual machine, which is very easy to run Windows on your Mac. Some people may not meet those criteria, and if not, that's cool. Just hang tight for a little bit. But if you did not take the survey, and if you are interested in testing this potential tool that I have, and if you happen to have a Windows computer or the ability to run a Windows environment on your Mac and Microsoft Office, hit me up at authorlevelup.com/contact. Just shoot me a note with your contact information, and I will add you to the list. So if adding up your sales reports, if you publish your book wide, you get probably 10 to 12 different sales reports every month, right? And what do you do with those reports? Well, you probably don't do very much with them because it's kind of weird and kind of awkward to do anything with just one spreadsheet, right? So this tool is going to help you take all of those spreadsheets that you have, one forever, so like for my past 7 years, and then also on a month-to-month basis, and it's going to take all of them, and it's going to mix them all together, roll them all up into one spreadsheet, and then you can start doing all sorts of data analysis stuff with Excel and however you choose to do it. But what the tool does is it takes out the tedious part of the process. All you have to do is bring your royalty statements, The tool will take care of the rest, and then it will give you data that you can start to analyze. And I know some of you are probably like, wait, he changed his mind? What's going on here? So last week I'd said, I'm not the person to do this, and so on and so forth. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to do a last ditch. Just throw this out there, see what happens. So I said, okay, I know that what I've done and talked about over the last few weeks has been a little complicated. So how do I dumb this down and package it in a way that explains exactly what I'm doing without being terribly technical? And so what I did was I sent a demo video to, I don't know, about 10 influencers, like people whose names you recognize. And many of them responded to me right away. And they're like, wow, this is very interesting. It looks very technical and very difficult, but I'm intrigued. You have my attention. So even though I dumbed it down, it was still kind of over some people's heads. So I've been talking with a few people to potentially build this for them. One person offered me money on the spot to do it, and I said, hold on a second. let's try it and see if it works first, and then we can talk about that sort of thing. But so basically, established authors, they get it. They understand what this is. They understand the potential, and so that's going to be my target market. Although those of you listening who have been interested, you're also in my target market, so don't worry about that. But I essentially am building a tool that takes all of the tedious parts out of it. So I don't know 100% right now whether it will work ultimately or not, but all of the testing and all the building that I've done up to this point has been very promising. Very, very promising. In fact, one of my main goals with this is to take someone who has no understanding of Microsoft Excel, no understanding of Microsoft Access, and all they have to do is click a few buttons to get all their royalty statements compiled. So whether you have one royalty statement or whether you have 100 royalty statements, if you can open up a program, if you can click a button, if you can watch a video and do what I do on my screen, which I'll go very slowly, then you can do all of this. So I essentially am taking everything I said, I'm throwing it out the window, and I'm going to start talking about this on like a second grade level, right? Because I know that I've been really deep in this stuff, and so I've got to come back up a little bit and just be super simple, right? No Microsoft Excel VBA, no Microsoft databases, no Access, no Power BI, no Power Query, none of that stuff. Just you get a bunch of crappy royalty statements every month. Let me help you take those statements, roll them up into something that you can understand, and get data that you can actually use. That is my approach. So for my wins for the week, as I said, I had a huge breakthrough in reaching out to those authors. I'm working with a few to kind of customize some things and work with them. It's kind of like a trial. If it works really, really well, then those people will help me promote it, which is a great thing. So I will be offering a product. I'm still trying to figure out what the name is going to be. As I said before, it's one of those things where the solution that people... no, let me talk about that later. That'll be a topic of the week because I'll end up in a rabbit hole. So lessons learned this week, things I'd like to pass along to all of you listening. For writing, the first thing, it's not so much a lesson as it is just a reminder for me as I've gone through this week that writing is one of the best ways to build thought leadership. So I kind of have this funky idea of, what if a database could solve a lot of writer problems? And no one is talking about this. I've got this lane all to myself. And some of the things I'm saying are resonating with some of you. Some of the things I'm saying are not resonating with some of you. And that's okay. There's no issues with that. But it is a perfect way to continue to put your ideas out there into the world, right? So I wrote a book, probably 5 years ago. It was called Indie Poet Rockstar, and it was the poet's guide to self-publishing, marketing, and the ebook revolution. And it was back in 2015. I wrote it in 2014, and I was seeing the writing on the wall, and I'm like, fiction writers are really having a great time here. I bet poets could take advantage of this self-publishing revolution because at that point, poetry was still 100% traditional. There were almost no poets who were self-publishing. Those who were usually doing the poets that were at the open mic readings and not. you just didn't see any established poets at that time self-publishing. And so I said, this would be a great opportunity to write a book to help some of those poets. And I knew at the time, I'm just putting a message in a bottle and I'm just sending it out into the world. And that book sold almost no copies for probably 3 or 4 years. Now I'm seeing the sales go up. Like I'm seeing a lot more poets who are realizing, hey, maybe I should look into this self-publishing thing, right? So that was an example of something that I did early on where it was like, I'm just going to just talk about my ideas, put it out into the world, and you never know who is going to bite. And it's the same thing with your writing as you think about your fiction and also your nonfiction. What are the things that you're passionate about? What are the things that you're passionate about that you could talk about all day long? And how can you use your platform as a way to continuously get those ideas in front of people? Now, I shouldn't say that there's a right or wrong way to do anything, but there is a right or wrong way to do this with fiction, right? I mean, you can make your fiction overtly political, overtly, about religion or whatever your poison is on that, and that's a turnoff for readers. But what about ideas like if you write science fiction? What about your ideas for the future? Maybe you have this really interesting idea about pollution, or you're following this really interesting method that could help reduce pollution. Wouldn't it be interesting to put that into a book and present it in such an interesting way that readers walk away and say, hey, I really like that way that the author described this way to curb pollution. Maybe that's something I need to write my congressperson about, or something like that. I'm being dramatic, but writing is thought leadership, right? It's codifying what's in your head and it's putting that on to the page. And I've gone on enough about that. Business lesson. Business lesson number 1 is to adjust your messaging like an optometrist. So you guys know, you've listened to this show for the past 4 to 5 weeks. I've been talking a lot about databases, and if you look at my messaging, it has changed dramatically between now and 5 to 6 weeks ago, because I learned what resonated with people, what didn't, right? And so it's kind of like when you go to the eye doctor and the eye doctor says, which one is clearer, 1 or 2? And they flip the lens in front of your eyes and you got to tell them which one is clearer, and then they do it again and you got to tell them which one is clearer, and you do it until they get a calibration and they figure out what your lens I don't know, metrics should be. It's kind of like that with your marketing, right? So like if you are running ads, or if you are doing email marketing, or if you're doing book marketing and you're working on your book description or your ad copy and the message just isn't clicking, just keep adjusting your message, right? Figure out what works, figure out what resonates, and just make those slight tweaks until you get to where you need to go. And that's something I'm learning firsthand with my database stuff. I have a second business lesson, and that is a blog post that I read by Seth Godin. I've talked about him a lot on the show, but he did a really interesting blog post last week, and it was on bridges and tunnels. And he talked about which one are you building? Bridges are monuments. They last for a very long time. They forever change the landscape. And when people point to a bridge, it becomes an icon, right? Like they put them on logos. I mean, they're just historical monuments in so many ways. Like in St. Louis, there's a bridge called the Eads Bridge. And it's like a historical bridge. It's where I grew up, St. Louis. And there's a lot of really interesting architectural things on it, and it changed the landscape of the Mississippi River, right? So, or the Mississippi River front, I should say. But if you think about tunnels, tunnels, you don't see them. They're underground, but in many respects, the fact that they even exist is an architectural feat in and of itself. And while tunnels aren't as sexy and they aren't as glamorous, they do create progress, and in some cases more progress than a bridge. So whatever the current project you're working on, is it a bridge or is it a tunnel? Both of them are equally valid, but might you consider a few tunnels every now and again? And this database thing I'm doing is absolutely a tunnel for me. So it's a question for you to chew on this week. I have a copyright lesson also that I learned that I just wanted to pass along. One of the things that I'm doing this during this pandemic is I'm trying to make it a point to learn something new about business, copyright, and marketing every week. Just one thing. All right, just one thing. So when you license your copyrights, sometimes the people or companies that you license your work to may want to take that work and license it to someone else. So the classic example might be a publisher signing a deal to get your book into audio. So you sign a deal to get your book into ebook and print with Simon and Schuster, for example, and then Simon and Schuster goes off and they're able to negotiate a print or an audiobook deal, right? So that deal that they negotiate on your behalf is what we would call a sub license. So whenever possible, you want to control a sub license situation, and you don't want somebody licensing rights on your behalf, right? Because you own the copyright. You don't want to give your copyrights away. So you can negotiate this into a licensing contract. So if you're looking at a contract, it might be a useful thought exercise to think about the potential situations where a sub-licensing situation can come up. And the reason I say that is there was a case in the news not that long ago, I think over the past couple weeks, where there was a photographer who had a post or a picture on Instagram that they had posted, and Mashable found out about it, and Mashable said, hey, Mr. Photographer, Mrs. Photographer, we would love to pay you to use this image on our website. And, you get a photo on Mashable. That's kind of a jackpot, right? And I think they offered like $50 for it. And the photographer said no. I don't know if it was either not enough money or maybe they just didn't want their stuff on Mashable. Who knows, right? So Mashable then took the image and used it anyway. And the reason they were able to get around it was because they embedded an Instagram widget on their website, and then they just used that to display the image. So they used the Instagram terms of service as a way around licensing. So if you post a photo to Instagram, you're giving Instagram and anyone who uses that program a license to embed your photo anywhere. So the question is, what if somebody embeds your photo on their website instead of paying you for it? I mean, they're not taking it and just flat out posting it. They're embedding it through another program, right? So, and it's kind of an interesting question. And then the next interesting question is, what if your photography business is based on licensing your photos for a fee? So, sub-licensing, interesting stuff, right? There's all sorts of different ways that it can come up. So, idea of the week. I'm amazed that I continue to have ideas, but this one is one I talked about a little bit last year. And that is this idea of a personalized editing rules engine that helps you become a better version of yourself. So I've talked a little bit about AI. And in fact, I'll put a link to the episode where I talked about AI. And I think I talked about this idea at pretty great length for a little while. So I'll put that in the show notes. You can go listen to it. And the idea essentially is, this is probably far into the future, maybe 5-10 years. But it would be interesting if you had an AI that could look at everything that you have written, not everything that somebody else has written or, a collective of what other people have written, but everything that you have written as a writer, right? And wouldn't it be interesting if it could look at everything that you have written as a writer and then look at your Word docs back and forth between you and your editor. So it could look at the raw draft of your writing and then look at the editor's edits and then look at the edits that you accepted and then look at the edits that you rejected. And it could look at all of this information and data over time and then embed that into a real-time rules engine that makes recommendations to you as you're writing based on edits that you've received in the past. I think that's really interesting, right? Because I think the big drawback with programs like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid is that they're very good, by the way, don't get me wrong. They're using a generic template, right? So they're looking at spelling and grammar errors that everyone in their entire pool has made. And they're making recommendations based on that. There's not really very much personalization. And I think personalization is the future. So when I think about AI, I want a program that's going to help me become a better version of myself. I do think that there would be a way to create this without AI, but it's one of those things where you peel back the layers of this onion, and you have to ask yourself, why hasn't there been, or why haven't there been better editing apps out there, right? Like ProWriting 8 and Grammarly are great, but is this really the best we can do? Like when you really think about it, and I don't know why that is, but there's probably a very legitimate reason for it. So I don't know what this would look like. I think it's interesting. It's not something I would expect anybody listening to be able to implement, right? But I do think that that is the future, right? Because when you are a writer, you want to, like I said, become the best version of yourself. And the best way to become the best version of yourself is to look at mistakes that you've made in the past. Because while you're writing your current work in progress, you're going to make the same mistakes over and over again. And you're not even going to think about them, right? Wouldn't it be helpful to have a program that could help you with that in real time? That is my idea of the week. So the topics for this week are, as I said before, a little bit of a hodgepodge of topics, but I think they're interesting, right? Just things that I've noticed over the past week. And the first thing is that this is something I had to learn over and over again. And maybe it just has to do with my personality type. But that is, sometimes if people won't listen to what you have to say, you just have to keep talking and be persistent. Anyway, no matter what it is, right? So like at work, I'm like a consultant, and I bring up ideas to executives and to leaders all the time. And there was one idea one time where I kept saying the same thing over and over in our monthly meetings, and the idea just kept getting dismissed and kept getting dismissed. And I was PC about it and so on and so forth. And then like 6 months later, someone sends an email and they're like, maybe we should do this and this and this and this and this. And it's like articulating exactly what I've been saying for the last 6 months. And then everyone's like, oh, this is a great idea. And I'm like, this is the idea that I've been talking about for the last 6 months. Now, the person who did it didn't steal it or anything. They didn't know I was talking about it. But I'm just saying, sometimes you just have to keep talking about something, and eventually people will come around to understanding what it is that you're trying to say. Or maybe people will eventually realize that, hey, maybe there is something that guy said. Maybe I thought he was crazy, but maybe my circumstances have changed and I need to go back to listen to what he had to say, right? And so I think the same thing is true with marketing. And I also think the same thing is true with writing, right? So sometimes you run a marketing campaign, or sometimes you write a book description, or sometimes you can write a series, and it just doesn't do very well, right? And then all of a sudden it starts to do better. So like, for example, let me give you a perfect example. This is one of these things that I uncovered with my data stuff, is that I have a series. It's called The Last Dragon Lord, and it's about a bloodthirsty dragon lord who basically gets his comeuppance in the very beginning of the novel. He's a supreme emperor of the world. Like, he is literally akin to a god, and he gets dethroned. And long story short, some of his conspirators try to kill him. He survives, falls asleep, wakes up 1,000 years in the future, where the world is ruled by his enemies. And so he's trying to navigate and survive in that future and also regain his power. It's called The Last Dragon Lord. The main character of that is called Old Dark. The first book is called Old Dark. And it's told through the perspective of a bloodthirsty dragon who's narcissistic and, will bite your head off and burn you up in a minute. And he's just completely enthroned, completely enwrapped in his own mind. He thinks he is literally a god. So when I first published that book in 2016, it sold a little bit in the beginning, not very much. But when I did the audiobook version back in 2018, that book sells better in audio than it sells in ebook and paperback combined. Like, it's a big number of what it makes in audio. And it's just so interesting. Like, I advertised the heck out of that book. Like, you would not believe how many ads I threw at it and how many marketing campaigns I did when I had the ebook and paperback version, and it just didn't connect. But now all of a sudden that I have an audiobook version, people are a lot more interested. So if you want to check that out, you can check it out at michaelaron.com/The Last Dragon Lord. So, but anyway, it just goes to show you that you just never know when your message or when a book that you've written is going to connect with people, right? So there's so much talk these days about books having a shelf life. Like, oh man, if your book doesn't do well within the first 30, 60 days on Amazon, it's done, it's finished. It's going to fall off a cliff, and the Amazon algorithms are going to hate it, and so on and so forth. And there's some truth to that, but you just have to remember that books can be refreshed. They're renewable. Just because someone doesn't like your vampire book right now, if there's anything we know about vampires, is that they come back every 10 to 15 years. So they're kind of out of vogue right now. But it's just a matter of time before someone comes along with a retelling of Dracula, or there's some new television show out there that renews people's interest in vampires, and so all of a sudden it shifts a little bit. Classic example of this is something that's going on right now, right? So if you wrote a book about a pandemic thriller prior to January 2020, maybe you did okay, maybe you didn't. But I would bet my bottom dollar that you're making a hell of a lot more money right now on your pandemic thriller that you wrote 5 years ago than you were probably in the last 2 or 3 years combined, right? That's how this works. People's tastes change. And so you just have to be willing to change along with it and just continue the conversation. I know it can be hard when you are marketing and you're not connecting with people. It can be easy to just turn it off and just say, yeah, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. But I think you'll be surprised if you just keep on and keep at it, the benefits and the results that you can get over time. So the next thing I wanted to talk about goes back to this database thing here. Like I said, this is a hodgepodge of topics this week. I'm usually more focused, but it's this idea that someone had talked about with me. We were having a private conversation about this, and they were essentially saying that I really wish that there was like a Scrivener for book sales, right? Like I just want to be able to import my stuff into script, like I can put my Word doc into Scrivener and I can chop it all up, and all of a sudden I've got a workable project, right? Scrivener makes it really easy to import. They make it somewhat easy to compile ebooks. That's a different story with Scrivener 3. I still think Scrivener 3 compiles way more complicated than it needs to be, but they do a pretty good job, right? If you can learn it, it does a pretty good job. So they take the stress out of it, and they provide convenience, right? And Scrivener is one of those rare tools where it's convenient, but it's also flexible, right? So like if you compare Scrivener's compile to Vellum, for example, Vellum is way more convenient, especially with paperbacks, right? Like a lot of authors didn't have paperbacks until Vellum came along, right? That's how convenient and simple it is. But with Vellum, when you're formatting your books, your ebooks, and your paperbacks, you actually give up a lot of flexibility. Like there's things that you can't do in Vellum that almost any other program can do. Like for example, with Scrivener, you can use internal links. So like with a nonfiction book, if you're saying, oh, back in chapter 5, I talked about blah, 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 and you want to embed the words back in chapter 5 with a link to chapter 5 so that the reader can tap on it and go to it. It's what we call an internal link. You can do that in Scrivener. You can do that in Calibre. But you can't do that with Vellum. There's a lot of things that you just simply can't do, that you give up for the convenience. And I think that is a normal human nature thing, but I think you have to be careful sometimes of falling into the trap of convenience as an author, and particularly with this royalty sales thing, right? Because I think what people want is they want a Vellum-like solution or a Scrivener-like solution that will change the landscape on this and make things really, really easy. And in all of the research that I've been doing and all of the people that I've been talking to who have firsthand knowledge of this stuff, and some of the techie people that I've talked to, I've learned that this may be one of those solutions where that's actually not possible. Like it's actually not, like what people think it should be is not at all how I think it's going to go. And I'm writing a book about this, by the way. I think I'm going to call it the author income problem. It's that manifesto I talked about last week. I think that this problem is so complex and difficult that the solution to it actually has to be unconventional. Like, and I think that the solution is probably, it's simpler than I think people think it is, right? It's just that a lot of people aren't going to like what they see, right? Like it's like, well, I'm sorry, Michael, you have a terrible disease, and it's like, oh crap, and the doctor says, well, you have this really bad disease, but I have the perfect medicine for it, but you're not going to like taking the medicine, and it's kind of like that, right? It's like you've got this disease, you've got this problem, and it's causing you so much pain that you're willing to go to the doctor. Jim Kruckrell of the Sell More Books show, he always said, if you've got a toothache and your tooth is hurting, what level does your pain have to be before you go to the dentist? Before you break down, go to the dentist, get that root canal, right? Or whatever it is, right? So what's your pain level? And with this, a lot of people's pain level, it's either a 0 because they just don't, it's just not on their radar, or it's like an 11 on a scale of 1 to 10. And people are going to the doctor, the proverbial doctor, so to speak, and the doctor is giving them choices. And you can take this pill, you can take this pill, you can take this cough medicine, and we don't like any of the options that we have, right? And the one option that I think is the most effective is an option that doesn't taste very good. Like it doesn't look very good. Like it's not the sexiest kind of medicine, right? It's like, oh man, I got to take this horse pill, this giant pill that's going to give me side effects and so on and so forth. But it'll clear up the disease very quickly. And once the disease is cleared up, then you're going to be in a much better spot. Well, I really tortured that analogy. I hope you understand where I'm going here. Messaging, Michael, messaging, right? So all I'm trying to say is that this problem is so complex that it requires an unconventional solution. And some people are not going to like that unconventional solution, but I think it is the only solution that is available right now in light of many of the problems that I'm going to talk about in this book that I'm writing called The Author Income Problem. At least I think that's what I'm going to call it. So just beware of falling into this trap of convenience. Like people will give their money away for convenience all day long, and I certainly am one of those people. But with this here, with sales, I think we're playing the wrong game, right? We want convenience when the real game is flexibility. Right? Like we're playing checkers, but the real game is chess, right? Because when you are a writer 10, 15 years from now, you need a solution that you can look back on today that works, right? A solution that works today that's also going to work 10 to 15 years from now. There's no program out there right now that I know of that could potentially be supported for that long. And so I think the real answer is giving people a skill set that they may not like, but that they have to develop in order to be able to do this. Again, like I said, I know I'm being a little cryptic, but you guys know where I lie using Microsoft Access and Microsoft Excel and all those sorts of things. A lot of people don't like to hear that. In fact, some of the people I reached out to, they're like, oh, this looks really great, but this looks really scary. All right. So I'm working on a way to make it really, really easy, like super easy. But that still scares people, right? So just know that if you're wanting that vellum-like solution, I think you're going to be holding your breath infinitely. All right. Now, another thing, the last thing I wanted to talk about today was something that one of the authors had said to me. They said, wow, you're really techie. Like, looking at your screen, I didn't even know you could run Windows on a Mac, and all the stuff you're doing looks really wizardy. And I was like, I'm not really that techie of a person. I mean, I didn't know anything about Excel macros a month ago, right? But my pain level was like a 13 on a 1 to 10, and it was so bad that I had to find a way to solve this problem. Like, it was that, or my accounting was going to be one gigantic dumpster fire at the end of the year, because I'm to the point where I'm getting ready to incorporate my business, and so you've got to keep really good records, and you've got to be able to be on top of all that stuff. And if I can't be on top of all that stuff and I get audited, yikes, no, thanks. I got to figure this out. And so my pain was to the point where I just had to figure it out. Some people's pain is not there yet. So one of the things that I do think that is worth investing in right now, and even if it's very small for you, is investing in automation. All right. So one of my strategies is how can I become a tech-driven writer? And what are some things that you can automate? Like there are two categories of tasks, right? If you look at all of the tasks that you do on a daily basis as a writer, there are only two types of tasks. The first type of task is a task that you should be doing, and the second type of task is a task that someone else should be doing or you should automate, right? So what are the things that you should be doing? Well, first and foremost, you should be continuing to write books. That is mission number one. Mission number two is you should be connecting with your readers. Mission number three is you should be marketing. Mission number four should be that you should be analyzing your data and running an author business, meaning knowing what your sales are, knowing what your expenses are, managing the taxes and the accounting, all that stuff. You know what those core tasks are, right? But I bet that there are a lot of different things that you do on a daily basis where maybe you shouldn't be doing them, right? So, some people, maybe you shouldn't be answering all of your emails, or maybe you shouldn't be doing tedious data entry to calculate your royalties every month. Maybe you shouldn't be editing your own podcast or your YouTube videos or, proofreading your blog posts. There's so many things that we do on it. We have to wear so many different hats, right? And I think we just get used to wearing all these hats and just being able to do everything. At least I know I certainly feel that way sometimes. And sometimes it can be hard to delegate and move things away. But what I think a lot of people don't have listening to this, and myself included, is the means to outsource everything, right? Because paying a virtual assistant is expensive. One of the things I talk about, and I continue to talk about it, is thinking long term, right? Just imagine the best case scenario where you are super successful and you're making a boatload of money every month. How would you, if a barrel of money showed up at your door tomorrow, how would you streamline what you do? Because you wouldn't be able to do all the things that you're continuing to do, right? It just doesn't make sense. So how could you start thinking about that now, right? So even though you don't have that barrel of money, what are some things that you can do to take some of the tedious tasks off of your plate? Right. So this automating royalty thing, that's something that's important to me and something I should not be doing complex data entry every month. My time is more valuable than that. That's why most people don't even bother with this problem, right? Because we don't have time to be spending 2-4 hours in Excel every month. No, that's not what we do. I'd rather have 10 root canals at the same time, right? So what are some of the things that you're doing on a daily basis that you can automate? And so I've explored a number of these things in the past and certainly invested in them. Learning some Apple scripts, basic Apple scripts, I think has helped. The Automator on your Mac computer, I think, is a great thing. There are some equivalents for Microsoft, like Windows programs. I mean, there's ways that you can do it. Are there certain things that you maybe should just simply stop doing? Like, would the world end tomorrow if you stopped doing X? And something I do every couple of years, and I recently did it probably 2 or 3 months ago, was I sat down and I wrote down all of the things that I do as a writer. Everything, every single task, right? And then I looked at the tasks and I grouped them first and foremost into, is this something that I should be doing? Or is this something that I should not be doing, right? So I grouped the things that I should be doing. Those are kind of the core. This is what Michael Aron should be doing on a daily basis, right? These are the things that drive revenue. That's like writing books, connecting with readers, doing podcast episodes, all these sorts of things that makes money for me, right? And then the second category is all the things that I should not be doing. And then I broke those into two more categories, right? So what should be, if barrel money showed up at my door tomorrow, what should be outsourced? And then what should be, in a perfect world, automated, right? So what would your list look like? I think it's an interesting question because you might find that some of the things that you should automate, you might be able to do them now. Like this royalty thing, I would have never thought in a million years that you could automate a lot of this, but the tools do exist. Right? There's a lot of really interesting things that you can do with Excel macros. There's a lot of really interesting things that you can do with like Microsoft PowerShell and Apple Automator and all Apple scripts and all these things. Are there tedious things that you're doing on a daily basis? Just small things like that add up over time, and they save you time and money, and you can develop an advantage, right? And again, I personally, this is my philosophy. I don't think you should outsource anything in your writing business that can't be automated first, right? So let me give you a great example of this. So I'm working right now with an author who who struggles with doing their sales reports every month, right? So it's such a struggle for this person that they hire an assistant to do it, right? Which there's nothing wrong with it, right? Because the tools don't exist to do this, right? So the assistant takes the royalties and all that stuff together every month, and they do it, and so on and so forth. Well, that's not actually a good use of the assistant's time if you really think about it. Do you really want to pay an assistant to do 4 to 5 hours every month of tedious Excel work? That's probably not the best use of their time. There's probably a lot of other things you could pay an assistant for in your business, right? So if you could automate this sales report piece to where your assistant is only spending maybe 10 minutes a month doing everything versus 4 to 5 hours a month doing this, well, that's a value add, right? I know I'm speaking business here. I'm being very technical, but I hope you can see that. And so you don't have to hire an assistant for this to be a problem for you. If you're spending 4 hours doing this, that's not an effective use of your time. Invest in a tool that will automate the majority of the process so that the time that you are spending is analyzing your data and getting insights into it and being able to make decisions and be strategic with your data. Because I think what happens with a lot of people is they spend 4 to 5 hours entering all this information into Excel. And once they get to the end of that 4 hours, they're just so exhausted, they don't want to look at Excel anymore. And so then they just quit, or they don't get to the next level of data analysis that's actually the North Star. All right. So if you think about that, what are other things in your writing business or in your day-to-day operations that you can automate? There are some things you can automate away, and it's the same thing with your house. I use the example, I bought, for Christmas, I bought a robo vacuum for my wife. And every night at midnight, this little robo vacuum comes alive and it sweeps up everything around our whole house, right? I won't say that I 100% automated the vacuuming of the house because it's still not as good as if I vacuumed it myself. But the house is a lot cleaner as a result, right? And the only thing I have to do is every morning I just have to go to the little RoboVac and empty the little dust bin and then put it back in and clean it off and off to the races, right? So are there little things that you can do to help you with that? Like, I don't know. I mean, because I probably would spend 30, 45 minutes vacuuming my house. If I'm doing like a deep clean, maybe I don't have to do deep cleans as frequently now because I'm doing that. And maybe that means I can get 20, 30 more minutes writing. All right, that's kind of how you have to think about it. You've got to be strategic and just know that the minutes add up. And this time during the coronavirus, I think, is a great opportunity to work on your infrastructure. I'm continuing to talk about that because I think it's important, right? All of us are spending a lot more time at home. All of us are getting a taste of the full-time writing life, maybe. I mean, I know I'm working a lot, but you're still getting a taste of what it feels like to be home all the time. And so why not invest some of that extra time if you've got it, if you're not, taking care of kids and other things like that. But why not invest some of that time into learning how to write better books faster, learning how to be a more efficient author? I think it's just critically important if you have the mental capacity to do it right now. So anyway, that is all I'm going to talk about this week. I hope everybody is doing great. The weather has been really rainy where I live right now, and I absolutely love it. I love the rain. I said that to someone the other day, and they looked at me like I had 10 heads. Like, why would you say you like 2 weeks of constant dreary rain? Well, I love it because it's just great thinking weather, right? And as I'm in the middle of building this database and solving this problem, I like the fact that it's dreary and depressing outside, and I can drink tea and listen to jazz and try to figure out this problem. So hope that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you're enjoying the weather and taking some time to take care of yourself and taking time to take care of your families. And we're every week we're just plugging through it, right? So anyway, I will talk to you next week, and peace. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll enjoy my backlist episodes at michaelaran.com/podcast. For your free starter library of my favorite novels, join my fan club by visiting michaelaran.com/fanclub. If you're a writer and want to connect with me further, check out my YouTube channel, Author Level Up, for helpful writing advice at authorlevelup.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.